trips to the same location.
We are live here to chat about this week's episode of Arrow, which is wild to say. We've got Arrow merch showing up on screen tonight. It is fully 2014. We are in the heyday of the CW, which is not saying much because even the heyday of the CW is really a dark time for television. But we're here to chat about tonight's episode of The Flash and also yesterday's episode of Superman and Lois and also everything we watched the last 2 weeks. I'm more excited than I've been in a while. And Carey, Kate, I know we usually start with news, but let's just get some shockers out of the way. I loved tonight's episode because to me, it was an episode of Arrow. So first of all, Carey, I believe you watched it, and Kate, you absorbed a few factoids through osmosis but did not watch it live. Is anybody feeling the same as me, or am I just delusional?
No, it was absolutely an episode of Arrow, and it was, I mean, we were all just sort of waiting for it to shift into Arrow gear, and when it did, it freaking took off, man. So absolutely fantastic. I mean, you get you get a street level fighting, you get his freaking catchphrase, man. You get the ending scene of Barry and Oliver doing what they do best, have a celebratory beer. I mean, you have Dig there.
You got Diggle.
And the absolute freaking craziest part is he had to do it on the Flash, but it was the absolute opportunity for Dig and Oliver to have their true goodbye, which we were robbed of in the damn Arrow finale because of obvious reasons. But at least we got that. So I'm 10 out of 10, man. It's all good.
We got the Oliver and Diggle ending, which did not have Barry hanging on and around, did not have any of the Flash folks kind of intruding. No offense to all of them, but it really did feel like a proper homage. And after all of the time on Arrow dedicated to giving other characters who were not Arrow characters their shine, it was fully appropriate to have that happen and to have, the moments of Diggle being there at Barry's birthday party as well, even before Oliver was there, just getting the homage to who he is in that universe. And then Oliver coming in with knowledge of the multiverse and, is able to share that, which gives information about who Keone is, that kind of thing. So great. And let's not skip over the fact that it was a Felicity mention. But with that, we're going to come to a screeching halt. We're going to come to a pause. You can see Kate getting as close to an ear-to-ear grin as Kate gets. Let's talk about news before we get more into tonight's episode. Are there any news bits you'd like to bring to us? Kate, Carey, take it away.
I have the exciting news that we are, and I have nothing written down, so dates out of the question, but in sometime in June and July, we are getting volume 1 and 2 of The Witcher season 3, aka the last season. It's not the last season, but it is the last season. I'm so sorry. We're very excited about that. Yennefer will be back in our lives. Geralt can come too. I don't care. So we're very excited about that. And then I think I've seen about 5 or 6 different articles, and I haven't really read any of them yet, about both franchises that are just giving me a throwback. Both Twilight and Harry Potter are getting in talks about having TV deals. And I don't know many of the details, but it feels very drama-filled and fascinating. So that's something I want to look into and understand.
It's insane.
Yes.
I mean, just speaking of tonight being, 2012 come back to life, that's perfectly on target, I guess. Yeah, both Twilight and Harry Potter. That's going to be interesting. And by interesting, I mean an absolute train wreck to watch it come to life. And I will be seated.
Yes. Talking of Twilight Renaissance that has been occurring on social media in the past few years, the Harry Potter Renaissance not far behind it, and then having a CW Renaissance, if you will, this week. It's really kind of culminating at a really hilarious time. uh,
Mhm.
it's interesting to see that it's happening. I don't know what maybe it's the 10-year gap or what, but it's great.
Absolutely bizarre time to be alive. On the more modern question mark television route, we do also have a trailer for a new season of Black Mirror, which I thought might never come back to us, but apparently it is. Have I been willing to watch that trailer? Absolutely not. I don't want anything spoiled. I want everybody to watch all the episodes first. Tell me which ones are like traumatic, triggering, obnoxious, whatever, so I can avoid those, and then I'll watch the good ones, exactly like I did with all prior seasons. So I have no Black Mirror spoilers for you, but I am fully open and accepting to Black Mirror spoilers myself as they arrive. Please let me know. Lastly, I believe we got a new Agatha Christie trailer today. So rather than this being about the, 2012, we're talking more like 1912 or whatever. I don't know. Time isn't real. We got a trailer for The Haunted. What was it again? Which A Haunting in Venice is what the movie will be. It's the next Hercule Poirot movie. So I did watch that trailer. It looks a very horror, less mystery, more horror, which is not usually my jam, but Agatha Christie is usually my jam. So I will definitely be watching that. Any other news?
I think I have one. We may have talked about it last week. I'm not sure about the timing, but I'll mention it again. Daisy Ridley confirmed to be in the next trilogy of Star Wars. Me and Cammie specifically will be seated for that.
I sure will be. I
Hmm.
am the leader of the Star Wars fake fans, and therefore I will be there with no prior knowledge. In fact, in addition to not having prior knowledge, I will forget everything I saw in all prior movies that I did watch and will instead just show up to be a fake fan for Daisy and any other woman, particularly if the audience does not like those women. I will like them even harder.
Well, forgetting about what happened in most of the trilogy is probably a good thing. So
You're so
it
right.
probably it probably will benefit the new experience,
Yes,
except for the Last Jedi. Remember everything from the Last Jedi.
I do. And everything
Hmm.
from the final, uh, trilogy of the final trilogy installment of the three trilogies of trilogies, whatever. Everything from there, I feel like I remember as long as it was the part that went my way. And then anything I didn't like, absolutely expunged from my memory. Can't recommend that highly enough.
I'm not gonna lie. I know we want to get on to some other stuff, but I'm kind of surprised that Daisy has agreed to come back because it's it's such a thing to be a part of, and it's like good and bad. It's just such a thing, considering that she could probably do so many different things to sort of get back into that universe. It's kind of surprising. I'm happy for it, but it is kind of surprising.
It's very possible that she's contractually obligated to be a part of some future installments, and that by choosing to be a part of this, it fills some contractual obligation. That's something I've seen theorized about. My ongoing theory is they're bringing her back because she is going to give birth to the next generation of Skywalkers, but that is unpopular no matter literally who you're talking to and what they are a fan of. It's like you could achieve world peace by pitching that idea and having everybody come together to throw things at you. All sides of the
Hmm.
aisle, all genders, races, manners of being will throw a slushy in your face, Glee style, for suggesting that. Trust me.
Uh, I I think both are possible. I also wonder because she hasn't been in a ton of like big movies since then. I wonder if she's using it as a way to escape the typecasting by going back to it and showing a very different side of the character. Um, it's something I've seen a lot actually. And when you think about it, like a person who is only ever thought about as a character, using that character to return to it and show I can play other things. That might be what she's trying to do, and then also the contractually obligated also might be a part of it.
It's a really good theory. Arguably a better theory than the world's most like simultaneously anti-feminist, and also both the feminists and anti-feminists will hate the take that I particularly theorize. But yet again, I still think I'm right. Anyways, let's talk about the Flash. Tonight's episode of the Flash was actually an episode of Arrow, but that only counts if you ignore the first like 15 to 20 minutes. I happily did ignore the first 15 to 20 minutes because those minutes were celebrating Barry, and I don't want to. Carey, what were your thoughts on this episode as a whole?
Well, I did not like the first part of the episode didn't disappoint me because it focused on Barry. It disappointed me because it focused on blood work. And I'll be honest, that was part of a character and an arc that I totally either forgot about or never watched. So it didn't mean anything to me. I'm just sitting there thinking, TikTok, man, we only have 42 minutes in this episode. Where the hell is Deep with Mel? So yeah, they made us wait, but the wait was worth it. I will tell you this: what really surprised me in terms of what I also really liked about the episode, or at least the pairing that I liked about the episode. And I'll tell you something that sort of disappointed. It seeing seeing Iris and Wally together. They were so good together in terms of their scenes, and
Chef's
you
kiss.
don't. Yeah, and it just reminded me so much of what we lost by not having that relationship on the show. It was a good opportunity, and I think it was wasted. So to see them on the couch and to see them have their moments, man, that just brought a smile to my face almost as much as obviously seeing Dig and Oliver back together and that sort of thing. So it just reminded me of so much of what I missed, not having those two spend more time together.
I
The thing
love
with
Wally.
I'm sorry, go
I've
ahead.
always loved Wally within the context of this show, and also I know he's, made appearances elsewhere. But his like sibling chemistry with Iris is fantastic. That is one of the best casting choices the show has ever made. It's a credit to both him and to Iris as to how well they play that, and for that to pick up and be so seamless in tonight's episode, especially with that added emotional context of her being pregnant. I thought that was really beautiful. It is such a missed opportunity that he's not a regular on this show. I know I've talked ad nauseum about the fact that I think that he should have taken over for Barry at a certain point around like season 3 or 4. That's not even this point. I think just even having him incorporated on the show as like a very main regular would have really helped that dynamic and provided sort of a helpful presence within the West family, which often gets neglected. The West family often, I would argue almost always, got relegated to being this sort of like, we're here to be the choral and support Barry and, like Greek style tragedy, lift him up and make him seem great, which is just a very degrading way to treat an entire like key family on the show. And the presence of Wally kind of circumvented that. And without him, we were left with this kind of odd dynamic that no matter what you did, always felt off balance, and allowed us to get into what we got into tonight, which is this idea of, why is Barry deserving of Wally's life? Why is Barry deserving of Wally's father and his sister and his family? And why is he deserving of being the hero and continuing to live on past so many people who past, getting to make all these mistakes and still be present? And we don't end this episode with an answer to that because he was not deserving of all of that. We get things we don't deserve, and I get that that's supposed to be the moral at the end. That's lovely. Kumbaya, let's all like sit around and achieve like the opening of our third eye, whatever. But ultimately, the presence of Wally brings up these great questions, and in order for him to ask them, he had to be villain adjacent this episode, which is very interesting. Stormy in the chat says, "Hi everyone, I was not strong enough to sit through an hour of Barry, so I listened to your program." Hi Stormy, we are more than happy to do that, and if you want to not have to sit through a full hour of Barry, I just suggest you skip the first 20 minutes of the episode and you will be golden. Or just watch like kind of the final 10 minutes even. That was pretty good too.
And to your point about having Barry answer the questions that you posed in terms of why he was deserving, it would have been, those are valid questions. I don't ever believe that the show had a really good answer to that. And that's a failing of the show, I think. Um, I do like what what Oliver had to say to Barry at the end in terms of what he sort of can be and has been for the city. Building on that would be sort of the answer to that question. I can only hope that going forward, as we sort of get toward the end of this series, right, that the show does a better job of answering that question of why Barry and why him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we've got what, handful of episodes left to do it. Um,
Not very
I'm going to be
many.
optimistic, right? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to be optimistic.
It'll be
Um,
interesting to see
and
where they go from here, given the number of kind of callbacks they have this episode. We saw from the trailer for next episode that it's going to be a flashback to Barry as a child. I make the case that seasons 1 through 9 are all flashbacks to Barry as a child because he's been a child the entire time. But apparently next week will be a particular flashback to him as a child, which will bring in, kind of what might be one of the final callbacks with, I'm sure his father reappearing and that woman who's played his mother all these years coming back probably to play his mother one last time and all of that. So we see this whole episode revolves around a birthday party, and the whole episode, despite my praise for key points, those points mostly being about 20 minutes in through 60 seconds from the ending, whatever, we see this whole episode is about celebrating Barry. He turned 30 years old. We're stroking his ego, but he's struggling with it. And I think we've seen him struggle with some of this before, but this is a particularly existential struggle. He's saying, Caitlin's died, Frost has died. I didn't want to go on without them. We haven't seen him voice things in that particular way before. We've seen him struggle with the end of, he's struggled with deaths a lot. I'll give him that. I like to rag on him, but he's been through extreme trauma, certainly. He struggled with deaths he experienced as a child, his mother, and also deaths of many of his friends as an adult. But this is the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, where we've seen him voice that he did not want to go on. He said he's specifically saying about Caitlin and Frost, but I know that may be the straw breaking the camel's back. What did you think of that?
well, my first gut reaction to that was all of that sort of felt like it came out of nowhere, right? We know that he's dealt with trauma in terms of his parents and that sort of thing, and that sort of he carries that around, kind of sort of like Batman, but in a different way, right? But in terms of this guilt about recent people, I don't personally, I don't feel like we have, there not been any breadcrumbs to that conclusion that I had seen as a viewer. So it was kind of shocking to a degree. It sort of felt like it came out of nowhere. It fits this story, but it feels like it was put in simply to fit the story. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like it came from a place of authenticity in terms of something that we've seen up to this point. And so it was a bit jarring when Oliver was asking us, like, there's part of you that doesn't want to go, and I'm like, wait a second, your family, your friends, and our person, your baby, are like in limbo, and there's a part of you that doesn't want to go back. Where did that come from? And it made sense in terms of his explanation for it, but I just don't feel like the groundwork was laid for it enough prior to that. Because again, we've seen them deal with. I mean, we've seen them deal with the death of Caitlin and even Frost. But it just sort of felt like, okay, we did that, we've dealt with it, we're moving on. And I guess it's nice to see this sort of thing where this grief doesn't disappear, even if you don't always see it. But as a viewer, it just sort of still felt like it came out of nowhere. Um, and maybe that's just, I mean, sometimes grief does pop up out of nowhere. But it would have been nice to at least have seen seeds of that somewhere, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I know, like, we had the funeral episode for Frost, for example, where we see him work through that grief, and he's fairly destructive afterwards. Arguably, destroying Caitlin's, lab is a bit out of character for him. Since then, there's been a few moments where he seemed more more somber or distanced from what should be his cohort than you would expect, and that might have been leading to this point. But this was about as direct of a like suicidal thoughts reference as a show like the CW would get. So I was surprised to see this come across. I'm not saying that they handled it badly, other than the fact that perhaps there wasn't a huge lead up, but there doesn't need to be a huge lead up. Everybody, all humans interact with this kind of thing differently and deal with death or things like depressive thoughts or whatever differently. But it was interesting to see it manifest in this way, which is not to say bad. To that end, a lot of how it came across, typically with a topic like this, or way less severe than this, I would say this is way beyond what the Flash could handle. This is not going to come across very well. They should not be touching this. This is like when Arrow was going to do a gun control episode, and we were all like, immediately, no, I heard everything I need to hear. Don't touch that, right? But in this instance, I thought there was a really thoughtful touch throughout, and I'm very biased, but I give a lot of credit to the handling of a lot of this, to the direction here. We know tonight's episode was directed by Daniel Panabaker, and this was a very serious directorial challenge, given how many things needed to be juggled here. You had to have an extremely serious topic, as we just mentioned, kind of be brought on. You also have to bring in guest stars. You have to have this celebratory aspect of his birthday. You also have to have what to me came across as Arrow style fight sequences that we've never seen on the Flash before, not even in the crossovers. And then you have the merging of two tones. We got the Arrow soundtrack, we got Arrow cuts between commercials. What did you think about the direction? Am I just biased, or was that actually really stunning?
It really was, and it's interesting because, and I don't know how many episodes she's directed now, but generally what you have is, obviously you have plenty of time to prep, but let's just be honest. Most actors who direct episodes are usually given the episodes that don't have so many moving parts as this one does. I mean, to your point, I mean, it was an Arrow episode within the Flash, but then you have all these other elements to it, and it was obviously done by someone who understands what separates both shows and how you can bring certain elements of both shows together. And to your point about that sort of the touch or the approach of dealing with such a significant issue, I can certainly feel that in the direction. My only argument is that there are parts of it I felt like, I don't want to say I felt like they were resolved, because I don't know that grief ever truly is resolved, but I never just sort of got that feeling that it was even simmering under the surface, which is fine. Like I said, and like you said, you don't always get that, but the actual handling of it was fine and well done. It just, I don't know. It wasn't the most surprising thing in the episode for me. That was something else, because I felt like I missed an episode when it happened. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but like when Cammien shows up and she's like using her powers like she's used them all her life. Did I miss an episode when she figured out how to use them and do all this stuff, or no?
No, you did not miss an episode. So we had an episode, it may have been the last one we saw, where she was training to try to figure out what her powers were with Chill Blaine, or whatever shirtless guy's name was. And at that point, they knew she had meta powers. We could all infer it was something related to plants and the natural and the, earth, wind, fire, whatever type of thing, but she didn't know what they were. And then in this episode, we're led to infer that while she's picking up Barry's cake, Oliver essentially comes to her and cues her to her powers. Not physically comes to her, but like through the whatever comes and cues her powers. We just don't see that. Number one, I think that'd be kind of hard to show on screen. Number two, she was directing, so they couldn't have too many episodes of her. So yes, it does kind of come out of nowhere. It is sort of the surprise in the end, but at the same time, for a while now, she's like the only person in this house who ever gets anything done, like announcing Iris's pregnancy and figuring out the thing with Chilblain. And I think, wasn't she part of resolving things with Chuck and Allegra or whatever? She's basically like a trump card type of thing of, solving everything. And I'm not mad at it.
She's basically Guinan from Star Trek: The Next Generation. She's a wild, wise old sage in like a young person's body.
Yes.
I just thought it's just always interesting to me that sort of like the best, most intriguing things that happen to her character always happen on screen, but I'll let it go.
Yeah. Well, they don't like to show development for women on screen. Relatedly, let's take a moment here at the end of this discussion of the Flash to dive into the Felicity mention. Now, after the Felicity mention, I found myself needing to phone a friend, in the words of Regis Philbin from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Something at least one of the two of you may not understand that reference. So this is me. This is me phoning a friend, and that friend is Kate. I believe is going to be our foremost authority on the history of Felicity Smoke. So Kate, at the end of tonight's episode, Oliver's talking to Diggle, and Diggle says, "So are you going to get to see her? Oliver has come from who knows where as the Spectre, and he's only allowed to come because the multiverse is in danger, because there are like rules to these things. So that's why he was able to come to this Earth, but there is a multiverse still. It hasn't been collapsed or destroyed." Diggle says, "Are you going to get to see her?" And Oliver says, "With this came rules. Felicity and I, our destiny is written." And Diggle says, "You would be proud of her and the kids." And for a second, I had to like record scratch freeze frame. And I realized for some moment, I fully forgot, because Oliver and Felicity ended up getting like 5 endings when it was all said and done. I fully forgot what the ending was. So Kate, can you or Carey or whoever remembers tell me how that dialogue sequence, which I just gave you like an exact dialogue sequence, by the way, how does that dialogue sequence fit with the final ending of One Miss Felicity Smoke?
So the last scene we have of Felicity, and like the last point that we know where she is when she's kind of goes back to his grave in presumably her 40s, and it's like, "I've raised the kids, I've done my job, my time." And whatever his face was, Walmart brand Thanos takes her to some other multi I wrote Carey. Takes her to some other multiverse location, and she comes in and it's the red pin and him saying, like, him meeting her there and him confessing, "I actually saw you before we ever met." That's the last we ever see of Felicity, but my assumption is how they're using the timelines thing is this is Oliver from what would be this timeline, and Felicity is still 2-3 years after what we would have seen in season 8 or season 7, really.
Gotcha.
Raising, so maybe 3-year-old Mia at this point, with however they're going to explain away where William is, whatever version of how he's where. And he'd be like 15, 16, I don't know. The kid was weird age. And so she's still there, but he, I guess, it's a confirmation that he didn't die. He's still the Spectre, even when he got crushed by the planets, or I don't know. It was really weird. And everybody kept on saying he's dead and that Felicity has gone to the afterlife willingly. I take what you're saying and him coming back as confirmation that technically it's not the afterlife, it's just a solo dimension that nobody can return from unless they have reason to.
That makes this make so much sense. It's the timeline piece that I was kind of missing here. So yes, with Barry
Okay.
being 30, that would make Felicity late 20s to 30 or whatever as well. I don't, I don't know the exact age thing. And if you've
Mm-hmm.
been around a while, I have a very specific and what I believe to be very correct theory about Felicity lying about her age. So I don't know the age thing. However, given all of that, this would be well before she gets, sucked up into the, paradise realm or whatever.
Spectreverse.
The Spectreverse. Oliver does make a comment when Diggle says, you would be proud of them, whatever. Oliver does make a comment of like, I know I've been keeping an eye on them. Also, Stormy in the chat
Mm-hmm.
would like you to know that Walmart brand Thanos' name is Monitor. And Stormy also says it may have been referred to as a pocket dimension at one point, which makes a lot of sense with it being multiverse.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the details got hazy. I was like, I see Felicity, everything she says, perfect memory. Everything happening around her, it's mumbo jumbo at this point. I don't care.
No, literally same. It was a nice little touch to add to the timeline though. Oliver's been keeping an eye on her
Mm-hmm.
and the kids, as we would expect no less. And she's only 10 to 13 years away from the paradise pocket dimension, depending on whether you believe that she has been lying about her age, as I do. Stormy in the chat just also noting she agrees with some of what we said about the ball being dropped with Wally and how he was treated as an afterthought when he could have kind of been the main star. And she predicts that Flash will be predictable in the end and Barry will get the happy ending that he never deserves. And you know what, Stormy? I think you're right. But if my trilogy at this point of Caitlin, Frost, and Keown also get something of a happy ending, I will live with it. And most importantly, Felicity is getting a Paradise Pocket Dimension realm ending, so can't complain. We need to take a little swerve over to potentially even a darker episode and chat about this week's episode, Superman and Lois. And for that, Carey, I will let you start us off.
The most recent episode of Soups and Low, it sort of continues this incredible narrative and balancing act that they've been able to do by telling such a significant story about cancer and the ravages that it can have on the person and their families. And I also thought it was really great to see how Clark was dealing with it. And by that, he was sort of like not dealing with it. And we all know that that's never any sort of a way to approach anything. Long story short, they're handling the storyline like incredibly well. I can understand why some people find it almost too authentic and too powerful to watch because it touches cancer touches so many people, and it's can be an incredibly difficult thing to sort of because within the first few minutes of the episode, I found myself like tearing up, and I'm like, can I finish watching this episode, right? Because it's so powerful, right? Which means that they're doing good things in the show. Um, and so yeah, that was my initial impression, just how powerful that storyline is. I will tell you this though. One of the best things that I found that they've done is found a way for me to sort of like, because every sort of superhero show is only as good as its villain. And in this show, you have two villains right now, and soon to be three. Cancer is the main antagonist, and then you have Bruno Mannheim, and and just speaking about Bruno Mannheim and what he does and what he's about. I mean, it's like I kind of sort of want him to win is sort of like just being elementary about it, but he's trying to do things that matter by saving people's lives. He's probably just going about it in probably the most reprehensible way. Um, at least that's what we've been told. That may not always be what we see, right? But then, of course, we get the reveal of who his sort of second in command, this sort of dark sort of villain that we've seen the entire time. And good Lord, man, I'm like, I want her to succeed too. And I've never rooted so much for villains, quote unquote, in my life, man. And that's damn good storytelling. I don't know what to do with myself now. It's like, who am I supposed to pull for? And that's damn good television.
I fully agree. And it says something that we're sort of rooting for or interested in or invested in the mission of villains on a show where we both like the heroes very much. We're not rooting for the villains because the heroes are boring or whatever. We're both rooting for Superman and Lois and their kids and all of their associates, even their most annoying associates. We are at least a little invested in all of them. So to be this invested and not just invested in a villain in the sense that like we get invested, we kind of like love to hate them, but also to kind of understand and empathize with them is really a testament to this show and how much confidence they have in the heroes they've created, a warranted confidence as well. I also appreciated they were doing something very interesting with the storytelling with the cancer storyline this episode, where we end last episode with a very moving scene of Clark in the a therapy group with others who have loved ones going through cancer treatment, and he hears, this will be the fight of your life for Lois, and to encourage her not to give up because it'll suck them in. And then in this week's episode, we take that same emotional beat and we see the impact on him. That impact was not an immediate, this spurred him to greatness. That impact of a beautiful emotional scene pushed him down. It made him struggle to then receive further stories of others in his position. It made him struggle to empathize with or relate to where Lois was at. It made him struggle as, both a parent and a father. And that was a level of realism that sometimes when there's a poignant emotional beat, it doesn't immediately bring out the best in us. It can bring out the worst first, and it's not, a linear progression. I thought that was really beautiful storytelling where it was nuanced, but we can still easily follow it. I will say one of the best lines I thought was Lois acknowledging that this was her villain, this was her big bad, and explaining it to Clark in terms he could understand. I thought that was really nice. And it was also explaining it to us as the audience in terms we could understand. So the whole way the story's been handled has been just really fantastic. And I've mentioned this to Kate so many times. I think I've mentioned this to you as well, Carey. I struggle with like cancer storylines or storylines where someone is sick. I find them extremely like sad and depressing. It's very realistic. It's something that needs to be told, but it is something that can so easily just be too real and off-putting. And so far, and I may hit a wall at some point, but so far for Superman and Lois, they've really struck that balance that's still keeping it that surreal, larger than life comic book type of thing where it still feels like a hero's journey that she's on, and you can still watch it from that sense, and that you're just far enough disconnected from reality to where you don't feel like you're truly, bearing a real life grief.
I wholeheartedly agree, but let me ask you this question. Do you sort of feel that way because, again, this is a television show where the expectation that the lead of the show, nothing bad is going to happen to them?
Yes. The second they go the route that something bad actually is going to happen to her, it'll change. Yes.
Yeah, because imagine this was like, say, going back decades, right? The movie Philadelphia, we know how that ended, right? And so say that this was sort of a different type project where we knew the prospect of the end being that she doesn't survive this. Would that make it impossible or much more difficult to watch? And I'm not saying that, I guess we're going to say that yes. I mean, that's the thought. But if she didn't, or if there was true prospect that she was not, would we be able to watch this narrative knowing how it could possibly end, really?
Not as well. It would definitely take it in a different direction. There's certain characters that you just don't expect to lose until perhaps the end of the story. So if the season was ending, similar to we just touched on Oliver perhaps sort of kind of passing at the end of Arrow, we would expect Superman and Lois to live to the end, Superman and Lois, and then perhaps there's some flash forward and they pass, whatever the situation may be. So to lose a character mid-show, it would just be for it to be Superman and Lois and to lose one of the two title characters would be too much realism, too much darkness, I think, for a CW show, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think because having this impact her gives the story the hope that it needs to be able to go to the depths that it has to tell this kind of story. And so I think you do need that balance. And I wish I sort of had been doing research in terms of getting an idea of like what the narrative has been like in terms of news coverage as relates to people who feel like they can't watch this type of story and what that's doing to like sort of like the ratings to any degree. I can just imagine that there are people who probably just can't for that kind of reason.
I haven't been watching, but it does make me question about, like you said, that it's they do have a bit of a safety net kind of interwoven in that you kind of have this belief that because it's a title character, they're not going to die. But you don't always have the same assurance when it's just a main character, and how much darker this could have gone with it being one of the boys.
Oof.
And that be just about as a main character as Lois, but they're not in the title. They don't have the same safety net, even though they're the main character. That could have almost had even more emotional weight because they are kids, they are still children, and then there is that less certainty because they're not title characters, uh, and I think that would have even been worse. I think.
Yeah. Especially when it's a child, that always adds a level of gravity to it. One of the things I think
Yeah.
we were talking about 2 weeks ago as well was how it's not just a matter of us seeing Lois in treatment, we're seeing all of the other patients in treatment, and we see her, for example, go to lunch with one of them. There's some very realistic things that are mentioned there, that have to, losing your appetite or losing your taste and all that kind of thing, and the kind of, I don't know, dark humor, gallows humor, or whatever. That's kind of a part of that conversation that they have there, and that can so easily, it's a girls' lunch on a CW show where they are also potentially talking about a guy that Lois is trying to get more information about. It could so easily go flippant. It could so easily go, making light of a dark situation, and they don't. They keep that gravity present. They keep the realism present. They keep the tone appropriate without it being, you know, every episode ends with a tearjerker because we're using this just for tearjerker. I feel like so far it's been very appropriate, but at the same time, there are always those topics, and I'm this way as well, where we just don't want to watch them even no matter how well they're handled. So to your point as well, if this is something that some viewers can't watch because it's dark and it affects a lot of people, I think that's very understandable. In the chat, Stormy mentions, my older brother died of cancer. Not all shows handle it with the gravity and realism it deserves. Stormy, I am so sorry for your loss. I'm really sorry for your loss. Thank you for sharing that.
You going back to the comment you made about Lois and the fellow cancer patient who were out having lunch together, it sort of just reminded me of what not necessarily in the same context, but it reminded me of what I was hoping to get this season. The fact that you have both Chrissy and Lana, who are in on the super secret.
Mhm.
I was hoping that we would have more scenes with Lois and the girls as they are in terms of just navigating like life and have those moments together, because it 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 always reminds me when you see like Lois and Clark have a fantastic relationship. They have a fantastic family, but it's always nice to see them interact with other people. I want to see Clark. I want to see Clark with John Henry more. I want to see Lois with Lana and Chrissy more. I want to see more of those relationships. And we see how well that Bissy Tulloch does them. So it's like you have this in, so just take more advantage of it. We'll probably get some of that, more of that this season. I was just hoping to get more of it by now.
Rather than saying our scene with Lana and Chrissy being them in a grocery store fighting for Kyle, what kind of representation of the Midwest is this? That's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed. In a grocery
Look,
store and Chrissy's hiding behind a shelf for Kyle. For Kyle, it can't be that good, Chrissy. Stand up.
I I know you remember what I had to say the last time we were
I've
on these
neither
channels and
forgiven nor
spoke about it,
forgotten.
and I'm not taking any of it back. I just wish they handled it better. I mean, because Chrissy deserves so much better. And I'm not so down on Kyle as some other people. But when I say she deserves better, I'm not talking about she deserves better in terms of her relationship. The character deserves better in terms of how the show treats her. It she All we know about her this entire season is that basically she's been having one nighters with Kyle.
No,
And
literally. Every
yeah,
other episode, she's in a bed.
and that's fine, and that can be fun if you balance it with other things like, hey, I'm running a small town newspaper. I need to keep this thing afloat. um, we need to see more of that, and basically having like chats with Lana on the park bench about getting quotes about town hall isn't enough. She has a freaking set. They need to use her in that set. Give her more to do besides booty calls.
Agreed.
Rant over.
And also, Kyle is a really good example of this phenomenon wherein guys pretend they haven't learned from their mistakes. Let me explain. Trust me, I'm an expert. I saw a TikTok about it. Guys go through a relationship, they make a bunch of mistakes, the girl leaves them, whatever, and they take what they learned, apply it in a new relationship, but not in an obvious way of like, I messed up. I'm going to apply this in a new relationship, but more so like they learn things through osmosis and pretend they've always been this great, wonderful, thoughtful, etc. guy. And so they get to go into a new relationship and maintain this perception of having always been right and never learned. And I feel like that's kind of where Kyle's at, which is why I don't think it's going to work with him and Chrissy, by the way. But for the time being, while they're the only single people in this tiny town in Kansas somewhere, and therefore, they have no choice but to end up in each other's bed every episode, he's going to pretend that he's this like wise, mature, whatever person who hides his girlfriend behind a rack. You know what? I don't even think it was a grocery store. I think it might have been a gas station. I think it might have even been worse.
Yeah, it was basically the corner store in a small town USA. It was like yeah, it
Embarrassing.
was.
They should both be embarrassed.
I mean, I understand why he would not have wanted to, like, share the ins and outs of this new relationship with his daughters. And by the way, we had Sophie in the episode. Freaking A. I'm pretty sure everyone forgot about her, which was also part of the episode. Was basically everyone forgets about me. So that was a
Fair.
meta. She had a meta storyline, but keeping the relationship quiet from his kids is one thing. But as soon as he felt, as quote unquote, he says he felt about Chrissy, then you have to share that with your ex-wife. She can't find out about it basically in the midst of chaos when, like you said, she's like hiding on the other side of an aisle at the tin can store. just can't happen. That doesn't.
Especially because
That's not
it's
good for
her
anyone.
friend too. Like it is somebody. It is like an acquaintance at the very least. It is somebody she knows. You
Yeah.
didn't move to another state and go through Tinder in San Diego. Like this is somebody in your little tiny town who she knows and sees on the reg. Embarrassing.
Yeah.
They should all be embarrassed. I can't wait for them to break up. I hope it's cute while it lasts because like I love a good cute moment. I'm with you. I'm rooting for your happiness while it lasts. However, I do look forward to their eventual demise, and I hope Lana gets Chrissy a divorce. Well,
Can
we
I
are
tell you a story that will make you explode? Can I tell you a
yes,
theory that would make you explode?
100%.
Here's a theory that would make you explode. Kyle and Chrissy are going to be a solid relationship. They're going to have a kid, and they're going to name it after Lois, who unfortunately succumbs to cancer. And the show will still have an appropriate title of Superman and Lois.
I'm unscrewing my water bottle and I'm tossing a glass of wine in your face because it's the closest thing I have to a glass of wine. But just know that spiritually on the inside, I have a glass of red wine and I'm spilling it in your face. But also, that's a really good theory. Don't say it too loud. The CW will 100% steal it from you. I'll one up that theory. If they kill Lois and they still have multiple seasons, guess what's happening? Think about it. Let it sit in your spirit. It's going to come to you without me saying anything. If they kill Lois and there continue to be more seasons,
Well, we
Kate
know
just put out a restraining order on me.
Well, we know where
No.
Clark's gonna go, right?
Hold on, let me find another glass of wine to sling, but this time it's at myself. It's at myself in the viewfinder. Okay. We've got 5 minutes max more. I want to give some time to you guys to let me know what you watched this week aside from Flash, Superman and Lois, and Arrow. Carey, I'll let you start. What else did you watch this week in like 60 seconds or less?
It'll be quick. I'm still watching The Last of Us. I think I'm on the third episode where, if you're familiar with Parks and Recreation, it's the Ron Swanson episode.
Oh, I'm
And
familiar
I
with Ron
haven't fin-
Swanson and the third episode of The Last of Us. Yes, sir.
it just feels like it's basically a crossover because it's the same freaking character. I haven't finished watching it yet, and I'm bracing myself because he's basically living the life that he's always wanted. And I'm like, this can't continue. This is not what this show is. So I'm bracing myself for a complete and utter letdown in terms of how happy I am right now. So I'm watching that. I'm binging Sarah Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. I swear I can speak. So yeah, that's what I've been watching recently.
Wonderful. Sounds amazing.
I haven't watched a lot, but I've read a lot. So we're gonna speed rate these real quick. So I read Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. She's the one that wrote Daisy Jones and the Six. If we thought Daisy Jones and the Six was raunchy crazy, a lot of drugs and mistakes, that was Child's Play. Um, it was really good though. 4 out of 5. The Song of Achilles is kind of a popular book that everybody talks about, loves. I read it. It's okay. It's beautifully written. I understand why people like it. Uh, but I found every single person intolerable, and sadly, they kind of had what happens to them coming because of their own pride and arrogance binding themselves. So 3 out of 5. I read The Thursday Murder Club, which is by Richard Osman. It's another kind of popular talked about book. It's about these 4 people in a retirement home who have a club where they solve cold cases until a real murder happens, and then they actively solve the murder. It's one of the funnier murder mysteries I've read in recent history, and it's one of the best modern setting murder mysteries I've ever read. 4 out of 5. And I read Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which is another Greek mythology book. This one follows the kind of the Minotaur, young girl who kind of helps Theseus. Yeah, Theseus through the maze to kill the Minotaur, who is her brother, and it follows her, like it creates a story of her and her sister after the fallout of that. It's very interesting. It's very sad. It's very anti-man, which is not something I like actively search out, but it was a
It's
very,
something
very
I
well
actively
written
search out.
story. Yes, it is actively what you would search out. It's it's very sad and very heartbreaking in a very good way. Um, it's it's the tragedy that everybody keeps saying the Song of Achilles is. That's the amount of tragedy actually in this. And today I finished reading The Hobbit. Everybody knows The Hobbit. The Hobbit's great. I had read it years ago, remember nothing about it, wanted to read it again. 5 out of 5, you know.
You are very well read. I am very impressed by that whole list. Great recommendations.
Tell me the name of the one about the murder mystery in the retirement home. What was the name of that one again?
The Thursday Murder Club, it's the first, and it's like 4-book series. I've only read the first one so far. I have the other ones on hold at the library. It's by Richard Osman. It's really good.
Have to check that out. It sounds like the spinoff to like Only Murders in the Building when they get too old, right?
Sounds
It
amazing.
had very strong. If Only Murders in the Building was British, and you kind of split the Selena Gomez character into 2 different characters and kind of like accentuated those 2 aspects of her, uh, that's kind of what you get.
That sounds great. Speaking of Only Murders in the Building, I know we recently saw some images indicating that they wrapped filming. Saw some lovely pictures of Selena Gomez and Meryl Streep. I'm thrilled. Kate's thrilled. Carey's thrilled. We're all thrilled. This week, I watched the finale of Abbott Elementary. It was really excellent. My ship got a little like school sleepover night at the museum moment, which I thought was cute as all get out. And then they got like trapped in a giant heart, whatever thing. They did come to the weird, unfortunate conclusion that she needed to be selfish, comma, and not date him. Something I'm not quite following for people who are ostensibly late 20s, early 30s. Like, I don't get the thought process. I don't get the planning. I would like to see your lesson plans behind this particular decision, but sure, go ahead. They're cute and they're going to end up together. So I'm going to sit here and eat my food. Excellent season, 10 out of 10. If I could give it 20 out of 10, I would. I also have been watching The Good Doctor. So good. If you haven't watched that recently, that's a really good catch up, and it's getting to a really good spot in the season with, deaths and births and marriages and whatnot. Looks like next episode's going to be like, if you're old like me and you know what Sweeps Week is, next episode looks like a Sweeps Week episode. I'm very excited about that. I will also give a quick nod to the fact that I marathoned a show called Obsession, and if you hate 50 Shades of Grey and would have liked to see a version of that wherein Christian Grey destroys his life by being what he is, you might like Obsession. It's not a good time, but it's like everybody involved gets their due justice. So that's kind of good. And some people get
Is it
more
like
than their due
watching a
justice.
train?
Go ahead.
Is it like watching a train crash?
100%.
Just
From
the
start to
train
finish.
Okay.
Train crash with like horror music in the background, and it's like supposed to be sexy, but the entire time you're like, I hope everybody's unhappy in the end, and then everybody's unhappy in the end. It's great.
I did forget to mention in the news that tomorrow the first few episodes of Love and Death, Elizabeth Olsen's new show, drop.
I'm so excited. On her press tour, apparently there's the like puppy interview where she's like talking with puppies, and that's going to come out tomorrow as well. I will be watching both of those 2 pieces of entertainment. So excited. Well, that brings us to the end, and we will be talking about the Love and Death Elizabeth Olsen being a serial killer thing in 2 weeks, as well as the continuation of a bunch of spring television, which will be wrapping up pretty soon, around the 2 weeks from today mark. Carey and Kate, thank you for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will chat with you all soon.